Good evening. Good evening. I'm Martin Murrow, Head of Grants, Networks and Learning at the Paul Mellon Centre, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's research seminar centred on the premiere of a new documentary film, The Enduring Legacy of Ladi Kwali. The film has been developed and directed by Dr. Jareh Das. Jareh is an independent curator, writer and researcher who lives and works between West Africa and the UK, and has held a range of curatorial and editorial positions. In 2022, she curated blood vessel clay, black women, ceramics and contemporary art, held at 2 Temple Place, London and York Art Gallery. Also in 2022, she was awarded a 2-year New Narratives Early Career Fellowship by the Paul Mellon Centre, which she used to focus on post-colonial perspectives in Nigerian and British studio pottery, and which has led to the production of the film we will see tonight, which has been supported by the Centre. So we are particularly pleased to be able to showcase the film and Jareh's research, supported through our new narrative scheme, which aims to develop a dynamic community of writers and thinkers with new perspectives on British art and visual culture of all periods. Jareh's work reflects those aims brilliantly in the geographical and cultural perspectives it brings into play, in its focus on black women ceramicists who have been overlooked, its engagement with questions of Indigenous influence, of representation and history, and complex power dynamics between Africa and the West, and, as we will see tonight, in its very form, by exploring the potential of different media, in this case film, to communicate, reflect, and engage with art. Following the screening of the film, Jareh will lead a roundtable featuring Bisila Noha and Isis Dove-Edwin here in the room, and Ozioma Onuzulike, who will be joining us online. There will be time for questions and discussion from the room and submitted online. For those of us here in Bedford Square tonight, there will then also be time to continue the conversation over drinks, with the evening coming to a close around 7 o'clock. But first, I'll hand over to Jareh to introduce the film. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jareh Das.
Hey, thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all here, and also people who are joining us online. I'm really sort of appreciative that you've taken the time to come and watch this documentary, The Enduring Legacy of Ladi Kwali. I hope everybody's feeling good. I'm a little bit nervous, just because, as a lot of people in this room know, this is research that I've been working on for quite a while, and it's also nice to see people in the room who were at the Body Vessel Clay exhibition in 2022, which is connected to this ongoing research on Ladi Kwali's legacy. And I guess maybe I could explain a little bit why this format as well. I'd spent time writing about Ladi Kwali, working on the exhibition, and it was just for me a way to sort of really, I guess, another way to sort of think about how do we sort of bring in a Nigerian perspective onto this question of Ladi Kwali's legacy, and really just handing over that perspective back to the community of where she's from, by taking this trip to Kwali in northern Nigeria, the Federal Capital Territory. And also Suleja. That was a really sort of significant city for Ladi Kwali's development and her internationalism. What do these two places and the people who live there, family members, relatives, what have they got to say about the way in which Ladi Kwali has been historicized, remembered, and what is the sort of condition of Gwari hand building today in this present time? Ladi Kwali passed away in 1984, so that's almost 40 plus years. There were very few people who encountered her directly. So again, this history is being passed down through oral histories. I wanted the documentary to really be about that, not me sort of narrating or giving a perspective. I've done that in in different ways. I actually wanted to be outside of that and just, really embody this oral history tradition by speaking to people and just hearing their accounts. All of this wouldn't have been possible without Japhet Kineze, who's online. He's a wonderful, wonderful young man from Kwali. He's the director and the CEO of the Ladi Kwali Foundation. He actually reached out to Two Temple Place when the exhibition was on, and that was how I got in contact with him. We started a conversation, introduced by Ozioma, who met him because Japhet had been traveling across Nigeria to do his own research about the ways in which Ladi Kwali's legacy had manifested in different parts of the country, the very few people who had collections of her work. And we just, I said to him, look, I'm going to come to Kwali at some point because it's something that I've been thinking about. I tried to in the past. I didn't have access to get to Kwali. And I said to him, I'd actually just like to come and visit. I didn't have this idea of creating a documentary. And when it became apparent that I wanted to sort of think about doing something different, I thought, okay, well, maybe we should go to Kwali and talk to people and create a documentary. And Japhet, what do you think? So he was, just the generosity and kindness and, oh my God, all of what he did for us, myself, Adewale, who was filming, and Andrew Asebo, who was documentary photographer. It was just transformative, actually, to have his knowledge as a indigenous of Kwali, and also for him to sort of introduce us to people in his community, the Kwali family in Suleja, and take a tour around the different pottery communities in this region. So that's what the documentary is sort of setting out. We went to Kwali, we went to Suleja, and we sort of visited a couple of pottery communities around to really sort of try to build a narrative around where Ladi Kwali's legacy lies within the context of Nigeria from the perspective of Nigerians. So that's kind of the summary of it. I don't want to talk too much about it because I think you sort of watch the documentary. I've been really sort of indebted to exchanges that I've had with Phoebe Collins-James, Bisila, Noha, Isis, Tanya Harrod throughout the trip. I was communicating with them a lot. They've been really sort of, and other people, but particularly, they've been sounding board for a lot of this research and through the exhibition and through to creating this documentary. So many wonderful people supported. Paul Mellon Foundation funded making the documentary, and for the last 2 years being part of the community of Paul Mellon as an early career researcher. They've just left me to do the work, which is usually quite rare for funders, where they're sort of, they've just given me complete autonomy and independence. So it's been transformative actually to work that way and to be allowed to work that way, really given like freedom and just space to do the work that you need to do. I think so fondly about the trip. Wale Dada and Andrew, Japhet, Bulus, our driver, Mr. Patrick. They were just such an inspiring team to be around. They worked so hard. What I will say is that there's so much footage that didn't get cut into this 29 minutes. So this is really just, it's a part of a bigger narrative. Thinking about it, showing it today, I can't even look at it because I'm like, oh, well, I didn't put that in, and should that, all of that. I'm just going to stop here, and we'll have a conversation with Bisila, Isis, and Ozioma, who's joining us from Nsukka East Nigeria, to sort of probe some of the ideas and themes in the documentary, and also our individual perspectives on Ladi Kwali's legacy. Thank you. Wonderful.
To bring greetings from Nsukka to all of you. Well, I'm as excited as everyone to view that very exciting documentary. And I have, one or two comments or observations there. First, the demonstrations by Kaka Ramatu Suleiman and Malama Musa Mohammed Kwali show a similar skill as Ladi Kwali. We see in their demonstrations the endurance of the Kwali people's knowledge systems in the face of challenges posed by plastic containers, enamel wares, and other industrial products. Their demonstrations show what Kadi described as real professionalism in every action. While he was describing the practice of the women potters of Vume in Ghana, while he was there in the 1940s. We also saw that the Dr. Ladi Kwali Pottery Center in Kwali was modeled after the Abuja Pottery Training Center established by Michael Kadiu in 1952. A place to teach new pottery making methods to people familiar with traditional methods. There are 2 large wood-firing kilns at the Kwali Center, as we saw. However, the dysfunctionality of the center, where Malama Musa worked for 23 years after training in the use of what she calls engine, a local description for the mechanized equipment like the potter's wheel, has historical roots. That dysfunctionality has historical roots. What do I mean? Historically, glazed stoneware pottery has never succeeded sustainably in West Africa without what Michael Kenneth Murray called outside stimuli. But even with the outside stimulus that Michael Kadiu went to offer for the development of glazed pottery in Ghana in the 1940s, ended unsuccessfully due to insufficient technical knowledge on his part as a pioneer potter. Then coming to Nigeria in the early 1950s was a second trial at the Abuja Pottery Training Center, which tended to be successful as long as Kadiu was around. And following Michael O'Brien's work at Abuja after Kadiu's retirement in 1965. For example, the satellite pottery workshops opened for the trainees who graduated from Abuja failed. Both the one set up in Kano and the other in Sokoto. Both potteries did not survive, mainly due to technical difficulties and government bureaucracy. That was also the bane of the Jos Museum Pottery, opened in the early 1960s and manned by a man called Clement Kofi Ate, who trained for a long time under Kadiu in Vume and in Abuja. The same fate befell the Abuja Pottery Training Center itself some years after Michael O'Brien, that is Kadiu's successor, left in the 1970s. So, unsurprisingly, the Ladi Kwali Pottery Center in Kwali that we saw in the film is in the same failed state. But let me hasten to say that overall, the people's traditional crafts and creative knowledge systems never fail. As we can see in the film, Malanwusa still keeps her clays for traditional hand building techniques in the Ladi Kwali Pottery Center in Kwali. And her hand-built pot appears to be the only standing piece there. So if we look very well at the film, you'll see a short clip showing a horde of big-fired pottery in the marketplace, painted with bright enamel paints. The pots have been channeled into other uses, such as ornamental purposes or as flower planters. These also define the people's modernity in their own terms, something similar to what Ladi Kwali did in her time using the technology that was facilitated by Kadiu. These are my initial thoughts for now. Thank you very much for your time listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ozioma, for the sort of historical accounts and really sort of, giving an overview of, what's been really this prominent, I guess, contradictory nature, actually, of Western pottery trying to manifest itself in different parts of Nigeria, the sort of decline of tradition, but also still surviving these challenges and also thinking of what that means in continuity of what Ladi Kwali started, this different technological interventions that you observed, and just, I guess, looking at these different conditions. Isis, I'm going to come over to you. Just maybe to just get an account of, the work that you've done on Ladi Kwali's legacy, the way she's been historicized, and also having watched the film, sort of make of the ways in which her legacy is manifested in different ways. One of the things that was really quite prominent to me in Kwali in particular is that we have these manifestations of Kwali. We see her mural in front of what was the site of where she was born. Image from the 29 node MBE lapel. So again, on the facade of the Pottery Training Center, there's a roundabout where the water pots are there. There's a lot of her image, this water pot that she's most prominent for, but there was very little actual pottery that we see in Kwali, and just this dislocation from the actual object, the pottery, that took her name elsewhere. Just
Hello, can people hear me? I've sort of forgotten the beginning of the question, but I think maybe just to say how I encountered her and just what my initial thoughts were on Ladi Kwali, and then come round to the film. So I first, I suppose, really encountered Ladi Kwali's work at the V&A in the ceramics collection when I was in my first term, I think, of a ceramics course, a BA at Central St. Martin's. And amongst the sort of vast array of ceramics there, when I saw her work, it sort of appeared to me as, I suppose, almost a door through which I could then come in and find my way around, or an access point. And it wasn't so much that I just recognized the work or the artist. It was more that I sort of had a connection to it because I'd seen similar work when I was growing up. And it was a turning point, or quite a critical point for me, because, as I said, I was at the very beginning of my BA, which was quite challenging because I went to art school in midlife, so I suddenly became an art school fresher, not at the age of 20, and also didn't really have a formal art background. So in a way, for me, it was this instant hook or way in, and certainly in that immediate period when we were doing contextual studies, it was a way that I could start to understand and be critical about art, but the sort of the way in was easier for me, or at least it felt very accessible. And in fact, going to how I sort of met Jareh, so I wrote an essay on, my first essay, really sort of critical essay, was about the way her work was contextualized within that display. And her work was displayed amongst a sort of a making ceramics rather than what I felt as an international studio potter. And then also I was very influenced by her because then that sort of, again, directed me to then working as a ceramicist within this sort of West African lineage, thinking about the diaspora of objects, how they came to institutions, as well as the diaspora of skills. Someone like Kwali, whose skills were transported here. They were, as you could see from, I think there was a photograph of people who were learning her skills, learning from her, and the way those skills were then passed on and transformed into different ways. And also the idea that her work was transformed and going back to what Ozioma said, was to sort of bring this, maybe the Western, the high fire, the glaze technique, so that ultimately her work became, I think, just to sit much more in a sort of a hybrid category. And so there was this sort of dynamism, there was what she brought to it, and also what was brought to it through using these other techniques. So that was really, I think, how I came to sort of research and study and become slightly obsessed in a way with Ladi Kwali. And then I think seeing when I discovered that body vessel clay was being shown, and Rebecca put me in touch, and we sort of had this moment because I think because she had been so important and her legacy had been so important to me, I felt I was sort of looking around into a bit of a void, that yes, it's true, she was on the 20 Naira note in Nigeria, but actually she wasn't particularly well known in Nigeria. She wasn't sort of, let's say, with the exception of Kwali, but just in a more sort of a distributed way, you didn't encounter her very much. So it seemed like suddenly I'd found a Kwali friend. Yes, and I think then this idea of legacy, and I agree that in a very sort of limited location, there is the road, and there are those other very tangible elements of Kwali herself. But I do think that, to Ozioma's point, the skill has persisted. I agree, and it's been adapted using enamel paints and other things within Kwali itself. We're discussing her here. And also, from what I understand, in most art schools in Nigeria, her name is being mentioned. So I think that the legacy is probably still there, but perhaps in a less tangible way. And, the art craft is all very dynamic, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the water pots and those sorts of works are being reproduced, but perhaps it's an inspiration behind it to create and work. And as we could see, there's certainly some people still doing ceramics and producing pottery, and it's really to try, though, I think, to acknowledge and recognize her contribution within Nigeria for what she did there, as well as outside of the country. And I hope I haven't waffled on. But
Thank you. Thank you so much for those observations. Bisila, I'd like to Bisila has been sort of looking at an intergeneration of older ceramicists, and also just in the work that she does, in talking about this intergenerational influence on the work that one makes, also a hybrid way of working, looking at hand building techniques, and also thrown pottery as well, which for me is, I think this question of hybridity is something super relevant to the context of Kwali in her lifetime. And although mindful of the context that the hybridity was brought on by colonial intervention, and then the choice of a contemporary maker, looking to these histories and thinking of different ways of making, and the women who began this Legacies as well, acknowledging them in the work and also visibility, learning about different practices. So I was just quite having the context of how you make, how you're researching, and also how you've come to Kwali and other women artists through this research. Just to get your impressions on a reflection on Kwali, having watched the film. Bisila also did not also, but separately, Bisila did a research trip to Ivory Coast to reunite with the maker Kouame Kakahá, who hand builds in her tradition, but was largely unknown to her until she discovered her work in a publication where there was a photograph of the work, and also sort of questioned this idea that, or this anonymous figure in the history of ceramics where people aren't attributed properly on the one hand, and on the other hand that there's this sort of intervention that skewers the sort of indigenous in all of this. So it'd just be nice to hear you reflect a little bit on the film, your thoughts on Ladi Kwali's legacy, and also in conversations that we've had, this question of, you know, this legacy of Kwali, her name, something that Japhet brings up, this brand, who does it belong to? Who has ownership, or who sort of is taking a claim for ownership of her legacy, really?
Similarly to Isis, the first time I came across her was at the V&A, and I think it was quite an angering experience because it was like African pottery had been relegated to a corner, and the way it is looked at and documented and studied is very much from a white male Western colonial perspective, which adds to all of the invisibility that you're trying to kind of like work against, perhaps. And so then when I started, or when I came across the work of Kouame Kakahá about 4 years ago now or so, because as you were saying, it was through the image of a pot, and then I couldn't find barely anything about her or images. So for me, I used Kwali as a proxy, you know, and in this like work that I was doing around Kouame Kakahá, it was just not about just herself. It was through her, like thinking about all of these endless women and women of color and makers that are lost because the labor was ignored and not studied and not documented, and so she, through her, it was kind of like a portal, you mentioned, to all of these other women. And then in that, because of all of that invisibility, then Kwali was the image for me in my experience, and she became, because of my own life and my own journey, I've realized I was craving like finding that family and like in the intergenerational and all those lineages. And so I still see Kwali as the matriarch of this heritage. And you mentioned like the images that are there instead of the perhaps the physical pieces. And, you know, in all of this work that I've been doing, I've always thought, well, you know, these women, I'm never going to meet them, you know, but still like so special. And I don't know if you went to see Body Vessel Clay, but like we were welcomed by this presence, you know, which, I mean, it gives me goosebumps when I think about it. And it's made me think a lot about like that idea of image, you know, and we cannot be what we cannot see and all of that stuff. And documentation is so important in whichever form, but I think like the power of an image is so key to be able to inspire and to empower people, and like the last woman was saying, like I saw all these other potters making, and that's why I wanted to do it. And I think that's why like the work that you're doing is so important in that sense. And it's things that I found like quite interesting and relating to what Ozioma was saying as well. Like there's this imposition of the techniques and like the techniques by Michael Cardew and all of the colonial projects, and how that has not been sustained because it's not part of the environment, which also like the third man in the hierarchy was saying, it needs to come from the environment. And when I was in Ivory Coast last year, I went to Kakah's village. It's called Tanou Sakassou. It's in the middle of the country, and there's a thriving pottery cooperative that has been going on since the 80s. And even though they face a lot of challenges, and there's been like generational challenges and gender challenges as well, because it was all women and now there's the men, and that comes with a lot of tension. What I find that is most important is that they are thriving because while they are changing, they're evolving, it comes from them. That they understand their markets, and as Ozioma was saying, like now the pots are for something else. They're not for water or for food. They are for decoration because the buyers are the Westerners. But they are deciding how they're making, and it is still very much rooted in like the tradition that the women started, and that's why there's that continuity, which feels like, yes, there's still things going on, but I feel like there's so much has been lost because there's a big disconnection from the tradition, and then like through that, like, I don't know, it's just kind of like cut through it, like by Cardew and like others, I guess. And the last thing, perhaps, because you were talking about the, I don't know how you mentioned it when you were introducing this, but there's the images, there's not the objects. What I found super interesting from like the documentary that called like a bit stuck in me was like the idea of Kwali as a brand, and of course there's so much wealth. I remember we're talking about this, but where is it? There they have the images, which are saying for me they are key, but then like from like all of her work, where is the wealth gone? And who's benefiting from it, and what is left for these communities, and yeah, I'll end that there.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come into that because that's did I interview anyway, because that came up in conversation. Actually, that came up particularly in Suleja, where well, no, I didn't interview him actually, but we were just talking, and one of the family members was saying that, I mean, you saw the home where she lived in Suleja. It's pretty run down, and it's a bit of a challenge to sort of even get there. It's not, it's really sort of a run-down compound. But they had a couple of items. I didn't film everything. They had an archive that I look at. I'm flicking through at the end. And they would like people to come there and that be a sort of heritage center site situation, because in her lifetime, people would come and visit her at her home in Suleja. This is what I was told. And, there was discontent with the fact that, and that Japhet touched on it, this lack of a recognition of the family or the families. Kwali Suleja, Kwali where she was born, and Suleja where she made a home and lived, for the rest of her life. And so there's all of these different interests, and just a lack of control actually as to, and this, this question is that who actually owns this legacy actually? It's like there's so many different ways that her work have circulated because of the project that was Abuja Training Center. There's barely any work in Nigeria. But then also this, is it governmental? Is it with the family? Is it with the institutions that hold the work? I mean, I've seen so much of Kwali's work across the country. I've barely seen, I think I've seen less than a dozen objects in Nigeria. So even a generation that comes to it is that where can you actually engage with so this is where the image becomes quite an interesting circulation, But it's, for me, there's such a dislocation from the actual objects. And what does that mean to just contend with a legacy through these images, through these accolades? And that's why we keep looking at the street signs, all of these things, and the actual objects that inform that history. You know, you don't get to engage with that publicly, at least as of now. So yeah, just some thoughts from me. Yes, we can.
That's on. Yeah, if there's a question at the back. If there's an extra microphone there. If you could wait for the microphone for the recording. I think we're here. Yeah.
This was made about 10 years ago, and a very different ceramics practice, but again showing that the absences and the presences within the local community. And so I kind of wanted to ask you a bit more about your process, because it seems like you were really drawing on oral history. So why choose a film? And in future, would you be interested in doing something with audio, storytelling in that way?
Thank you for your question. I'm not a filmmaker. I've never made a film before. But I certainly think, I did think about what you said actually. Should it just be an oral history of sound? But I think coming back to your point about the absence presences, I actually wanted that to be visualized in a film. I thought it was really important. And I also thought that having written about Kwali, and then the exhibition had happened, you know, it was also thinking about, well, what else could I use as a medium to really sort of engage with these ideas? So yeah, that's just a kind of approach that I was looking at really. I was just sort of testing things out as well. You know, like I said, we have so much footage that when I look at this, I also think about other things that weren't in it. It's been ongoing work for me, and just sort of, it just felt to really, and because, I mean, I'm coming to this generation, I mean, I was 2 when Ladi Kwali died. This is almost 40 years on. I thought the film, as I said, you know, really needed to capture this subtle, I mean, I didn't know what I had an idea of what I might encounter in Kwali, but it just felt really appropriate to this sort of trying to piece together this legacy.
Oh, there we go, my own microphone. We've got a question online here, which actually there's several lined up, but the first is from Jaya Lakshmi Mystery. Apologies, I forgot the name wrong. Thank you for the beautiful film. Following on from what Ozioma said, I see parallels with the research I've done with Indigenous potters in Guyana, namely the tension between what the potters themselves see as modern pottery and their own traditional practices, the latter seen as somewhat backwards, in inverted commas. They have also been introduced to glazes, yet they cannot sustain glazing work which relies on glazes bought from outside the community and requiring high temperatures that they can't regularly achieve in their wood-fired kilns. While trying to create these modern wares, they are rapidly losing their traditional knowledge of pottery. Question for Dr. Jareh and the others on the panel: what are your reflections on this tension from the Kwali Nigerian context?
Pass that to Ozioma, and I'll come at the end.
Yeah, I think the comment is quite spot on, because like I noted earlier, there is a big disconnect. it's very difficult to do stoneware pottery without a knowledge of science. I mean, of the science of glazes and science of high temperature firing, which the local potters never needed. They never needed that for the kind of work they were doing and for the purpose in which the pots were put. They never needed such high firing technology. And so introducing it brought a lot of difficulties, where even those who learned under the great Kouame Kakahá never were able to sustain gloss-fired pottery up until now. And that was why I wanted everyone to get a sense of the context in which the Dr. Ladi Kwali Pottery Center is almost derelict. It's almost like almost like I should close my eyes when some of the footage from that center was being shown, But I had to show that dysfunctionality there has historical roots. So I can see, I can connect with the comment by the person who has given us that feedback.
Thank you, Ozioma. Maybe just to add a little bit to that. When I was speaking to Japhet before and after arriving at the foundation, also sort of politically in the context of FCT Kwali, they've had challenges, right? They've had challenges access-wise. I think also part of the center during NSARS, some protests, I don't know who, people stormed part of the center and destroyed it. And then, you also have to think of a context where you had at the end the Pottery Training Center in Suleja, which has been going through this, 10+ year regeneration, World Bank funded project, governmental, and the foundation that is the Kwali Area Council, local government council initiative and community members. And then there's this question of a distribution of resources, right? Consistency, governmental changes and the impact that has on actual sustaining infrastructure, even with the best intentions. So I think this sort of Nigeria-specific context is also something to think about. But there's two things at play. You have the unnaturalness of this, located in the context that it's in, and then also this context of infrastructural impossibility, actually, sustaining such projects. So I just wanted to add that.
I was also just going to add that, yes, I agree that there is this tension, and somehow, I suppose, particularly with ceramics, the tension has come with ceramic glazes and high firing, which also requires electricity and a lot of energy, so that makes it very difficult. However, I think that there are ways that these traditional methods can be preserved, but not necessarily pickled and static, but transformed in other ways. And in ceramics, it may not necessarily be with this high firing, high energy cost, but other ways. And, I am, as Ozioma had said, people who use enamel paints, and there are all sorts of other ways which, perhaps can be a little bit poo-pooed, by the community or whatever. But actually they are, I guess, they're acts of agency and acts of transformation, acts of dynamism, and they can be founded on these traditional methods, because I don't think that they should be entirely static, but that they should change in ways that are appropriate to the environment and then it's for everybody else to sort of, look and see them and take it as what it is, rather than what it isn't or what it cannot be, based on a sort of not necessarily an ideal, that's perhaps wrong, but a sort of barometer that is really quite inappropriate for that context.
We've got another question online here. That maybe questions lining up in the room. This is from Sharon Bertram. Where would you describe Ladi Kwali's influence of her technical skill and work? Well, how would you describe how Ladi Kwali's technical skill and work can be seen as an influence on Kaju and the likes?
Yeah, can I get that question again?
So it's about the influence of Ladi Kwali's technical skill and work, how it can be seen in the works of Kaju and the likes.
All right, I think that's quite evident in the works that Kaju did while he was in Abuja and beyond. Kaju actually worked very closely with Kwali, in the sense that Kwali would make the pot, Kaju would glaze it, and the firing team would fire the wares. And so during that time, if you look at much of the work that Kaju exhibited in London and other places while he was in Abuja, there was a very strong influence. It was very evident, that, he may not have picked that up directly from Ladi Kwali, but it sensitized him to look at the forms and techniques of traditional pottery around the Abuja area and other areas in northern Nigeria. And that informed, for example, his casserole. The casserole with two hands that is part of Kaju's oeuvre is actually a translation from the local casserole, even the decorations on it. So, yes, Kaju was influenced by Kwali and the traditional pottery center around the area, as much as Kwali was influenced by Kaju's glazing methods. In fact, most of her works, she never glazed them. She would just make the work, and Kaju and other workers in the pottery center would go on with the glazing and firing. That was the structure of the pottery training center. Thank you.
Hi. Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much for everything. I'm interested, Jareh, just to hear all of you really speak on your dedication to researching Kwali, but also through conversations, dialogues with the work and ideas of living artists, intergenerational, and across place and countries. And I was thinking about two things over the course of hearing you talk and watching the film, about thinking about materials and just some of the, political conversations about materials and business and what it is to have the kind of intuition and ancestral learning of being an artist, as well as being a business person, and that those two things don't always have to be or should be necessarily understood through a kind of definitely not kind of like a Western art world lens, and definitely not necessarily a capitalist lens, even though capitalism and colonialism and economies are always threaded through. I guess I'm thinking about the fact that this idea that the UK, for example, might be able to produce certain kind of wares based on what is possible here is and always has been also linked to international import and wealth. There's no copper mines, as far as I know, working in the UK now. Cobalt is obviously made on the continent. Like, there are so many resources that are either possible because of industrial practices being possible. Like, you know, many of us are not like running up a stream to dig up our own clay. So those, you know, we're using compounds that have been created. And so it's kind of like a two-part thought and question. One is sort of like these material politics that go back and forth across continents and economies and politics. And then the other one is also this like real beautiful thing that I think came out from different people speaking in the film, which is about this idea of the becoming of an artist almost not being able to be siloed into one thing or another, like the necessity of maybe producing something functional or something to earn money, not kind of like undermining the like spiritual and the third man of the community, speaking about the mind, and it kind of like just very smoothly moving through that kind of like necessity, intellect, intuition. And I think a lot of us who are artists and potters know that that is just like not fluid in the sense of like not without disruption, but like definitely just like, you know, yeah. Anyway, so that's a lot of thoughts and questions.
I'm just like, which one? Sorry. No, it's okay. I mean, I think that something that was really prominent to me was just also coming into the community in Kwali and around, was this idea of sort of, okay, there's the hand-building tradition, but then there's also the ways in which there's a response to pottery, or what people perceive as pottery, that is useful for them. And these were like quite different things, or operating differently. So for example, in one of the clips, and it actually took quite a while to find these hand-built pots in the market, on market day. And there was just a small portion of them. And then you go to this roadside community where these decorative enamel pots, which, you know, in terms of location, they're just by the road, they're very visible. You could just pull up. In fact, whilst we were there, they're offloading, they're selling. So that's moving in a sort of commercial sense and functional and useful. But then behind all of that actually was where we'd encountered Kakahá, who was making these incense burners, actually. And then also just sort of mapping out what the sort of hand-built was useful for. In another, it's not in the film, but in Giri, the pots are like, I mean, there was like hundreds of pots being used for traditional medicine. Still doesn't hold it in terms of, I mean, it does, but it's in terms of sort of mixing the herbs. It didn't count as a transference. So there was an economy around that, actually. This village in, sorry, not Giri, Piri. It's like Giri was the roadside. Piri is another village where these hand-built pots for herbal medicine was sustaining it. So a lot of people were continuing the tradition. And And then also just, I guess, come into this idea that all of these different things are sort of operating side by side on different scales. And I guess it also comes back to Isis's point about an evolution of a legacy, actually, that it can be many things. It can be sort of the skill being passed down through sort of the way it's always been passed down. It could be someone looking to that tradition to influence their work. And it's also thinking about how the context within the socio-political is responding to its changes and adapting. Yeah, I don't know if that quite...
Yeah, the politics of the materials, is that how you call this? It's something that I think about a lot, and that is, I believe, is very present in my work, because Jareh was talking about my work as hybrids, and it's exactly about that. And I think because also we're talking about ceramics specifically, and then there's the hierarchy and there's the politics in the, like, if it's hand built, earthenware, women, traditional is craft. If it's like more advanced technologies and men and glazes and then is art, and which creates a lot of tensions. And then like that's how like all of these histories are not considered. So for instance, for me, like I like bringing both things together, and kind of like putting them on the same level, and bringing like to like that evolution that you were talking, that nothing is static, but like having it very well, the foundations are like the histories, if you like, and I think it also like with glazes and to me also is like the beauty of the clays in themselves, especially terracotta. You don't see terracotta pots in certain museums. It's like ethnographic museums or like art history, like natural history museums, etc. So it's like having those materials present, visible, like, and speaking for themselves. For me, I think it's important to remind us of like everything that came before, and still like kind of like maybe fighting against that, like those politics that are like, is the north and south divide, is gender as well, is class. I mean, there's so many things that like run through that. And to the question about like maybe the spiritual versus the money making side of it, I think also there's a big these expectations on like, if you're going to be an artist, you're going to be an artist, and this is the one thing that you're doing also, because I think of the cultures we live in where you go onto this one path and this is the one thing that you do and this is how you find success. And it also goes back also to this whole like the individual and the name and the fame and like authorship and all stuff. And I think like for me, what I found that gives me a lot of peace in order to preserve the spirituality and be able to address like, or like face my work in a way that is not quote unquote contaminated by the money, even though obviously I want to sell it and I love it when it, is by choosing to do something else that is gonna fit all of that, and not shying away from it, because I think there's a lot of shame in like with artists when you are not making a living out of it. It's so difficult to make a living out of anything. So I think it's also like, I don't know, preserving our own well-being in different ways, and not putting also art in this pedestal, which we became like all these like heroes kind of thing. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I think that the conversation here will continue, and there are a few comments and follow-up questions online. But there is one question. I think we'll have to have a kind of final question, but just follow on quite nicely from what you're saying there, which is from Frida Egiogbe. How do we create a space where we learn about the amazing women behind these beautiful works, without the exotification of their works and the sacredness of the objects they make.
Well, I think in terms of it being exotified, and that will be down to context. So I suppose it will be where this space is probably primarily where it's located and how it's presented. But if I'm not going to shy away too much, just to say that I think that Jareh, you have kicked this off or continued from where others have started, but really have got this going at, I think, a really crucial time. And that is because we can see that there are people who have passed on. It's becoming further away from people who live there. So even knowing that there was that sort of split over the two sites. So I'm going to sort of throw it back to you I'm staying on topic with the question, is that I think the answer to that is probably going to lie in what you have already done in presenting the works in body, vessel, clay, where I don't think that they were exoticized. I think they were really offered, they were presented. Ladi Kwali was foregrounded without completely decontextualizing her from obviously the Kaju and the Abuja pottery. And now you've presented a film, you've got, as you say, a lot of information. And I think that the answer to the question is, I think Jareh is going to figure that one out. I think she's already started and she's going to figure it out.
Okay, thank you. That wasn't well, yeah. No, I have really strong opinions about this actually, because I do feel that when you come from a background as a scholar researcher to, I don't know, in some way like reposition the way something has been thought of, there's also a process of letting others continue. I do think that, there were just so many things on my mind with the research I've been doing, and then all these public-facing parts of it. So you have the exhibition, you have the film, to just, I guess in a way, to just really get people, and myself included, thinking about, and I mean, especially for me, this legacy is actually for Kwali and Suleja. It's not, I've sort of, I am doing work to bring it into a consciousness, and that's where it sort of ends actually. As you rightly identified, creating a context where, absolutely, this is not an exoticization project. This is also a project that, for me, the thing that was sort of really ticking me off was, where's this emphasis on women making pots, passing it down generationally? Where's the emphasis on that? Because that's the sort of foundation of this legacy of Ladi Kwali, at least from my perspective. There's other things that happen, but this grounding is so important for people to know, to recognize and learn about. And this documentary, for me, there's always been this question of, well, I can think this and people can think this and we can all sort of do all these things in the West, but what is the position of the actual family members? It's been such an important question to me, always thinking back, okay, we need to return this narrative, how she's been framed back to Kwali, but then also, where is this sort of position and voice coming from Kwali, Suleja, Nigerian perspective, outside of the spaces that have spoken about it for so long, actually. Yeah.
I think with that, time is against us. We're going to have to say goodbye to our online audience. The conversation here in Bedford Square will continue. But I think all of us should join together to say a huge thank you to all our panelists, and especially to Jareh for sharing the wonderful
Thank
film
you,
this evening.
Ozioma.
Thank you, everyone.